Hi, okay, this is the third time I'm making this because the audio is not working. Anyway, so let's begin. My name is Ik, I'm working alone, and this is not the main deliverable of my project because I also wrote 6 summaries of relevant reinforcement learning research articles that should also have been included in my submission, so please take a note of that because that was a bigger part, this is the smaller part of the project. So I'm going to be introducing Grid World, and Grid World is a very straightforward representation of Q-learning. The researchers Sutton and Bardo introduced Grid World long ago, and I also talk about them in my summaries. So in Grid World, we have a set of rules. We start at the top left, and we can move one space per turn. An episode or an iteration ends when we reach the goal state or a death trap. And finally, we lose points with each successive step. So here I go ahead and define an 8x12 board, along with all the coordinates for the death traps, which will blow up if you land on them and cost 100 points. So we're just defining the initial world in the cell, and now we continue on. We want to assign costs and colors to the board and represent the board for viewing. So as you can see, the blue here stands for the start, yellow for the goal, and then we have death traps, which are all represented in red. I could have made this representation, this world, however I wanted, but this one seemed interesting enough, so I went with it. Finally, now we get to Grid World. So we have 8x12, 96 possible discrete states. The definition next is going to define a new or next state. This takes in an action from the agent and evaluates the next position. It returns a tuple of the coordinate at the new position. Definition points. We want to check if the given state for its cost, either being -1 for no events or -100 for a death trap. The definition log states. This we create a history of the visited states and the total points we currently have. Definition can do. Returns all possible moves, any and all that are valid actions from the current state. And game over, straightforward, it's an if statement. If we reach any of the conditions that we talked about earlier, death trap or end or the goal, it will end the iteration. Now we have a class called Roro Noah Zoro. This one is modeled after a guy who has terrible direction. It's an agent that makes very random decisions when it comes to direction. It can choose any possible action given the current state, and although it says it'll learn something, it's not really going to. It's really just used for random movement. So the definition go here, it takes in the current world, the agent figures out a list of possible moves from the current state, does an action and computes a change state, and then it calculates the number of points we receive, it learns, and the next state becomes the current state. This is all one turn. The definition plot path, I simply just go ahead and actually make, I plot all the different points that the random agent went ahead and took. So Zoro went here in the circles and landed on an X, which is the death trap. Now finally, we get to Q-learning. So to begin, let's talk about the arguments. Q-learning has epsilon, which is a parameter for epsilon greedy action selection. Then we have a decay factor for epsilon between 0 to 1 to modify it. Alpha is our learning rate and step size. Gamma is the discount function calculated for future rewards. Self.q we have as a default dictionary, which returns 0 for unknown state action pairs. Self.a is a state tuple. This is, well, the values are keys of actions that have already been taken, and we need this to be able to determine if the action in the state has already taken place in the past. The definition act, so we choose an action. The action can be random or greedy to ensure exploration. If epsilon is small, there would be less randomness. So the definition act greedy. If epsilon is small, we will go ahead and choose a greedy action, and most likely the action with the highest Q value. If we have a high epsilon, it's going to act more randomly and choose action at random. Going up a little bit here, we have a definition of learn. This evaluates a Q function to provide an update to the Q values when reaching the next state and acquiring points. The new value is equal to the old value plus the computed TD error times the step size parameter alpha. Now we have the definition TD. TD stands for temporal difference error. I also talk about this in my summaries. This function checks if the agent has already performed an action in the past, and if it not, the maximum Q value is set to 0. Otherwise, it finds the Q values for all previously executed actions in the new state tracked in self.a. Then we find the key of the largest Q value and calculate the error. Finally, the definition play, we're just essentially running the program. We're training it across a certain number of iterations. Here we have 300 iterations, score is -57, 500 iterations, score -31. The best possible I ever saw was -29, but for this seed specifically that I wrote, seed 1, 2, 3, 4, I got -31. Then I just go ahead and plot the information, and here we have a heat map of the agent's strategy, or also the policy across Grid World. Then we plot the path the agent took in Grid World, right over here, start state, goal state. And finally, then we have a time series representation of the score per iteration. And as you can see, the program starts to learn something around iteration 200. And finally, the lower graph, we have the TD error per step taken shows progression starting around step 5,000. It's kind of hard to tell, but dramatically minimizes by about 10,000. And that's just all I have. This was, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.